A new chapter or a compromise in US-Sudan relations? A high-level delegation from Khartoum visits Washington for the first time. Is Bush finally happy with al-Bashir? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Imran Garza. A delegation of Sudanese senior officials led by Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Samani al-Wasila are in the US for talks with their American counterparts. The visit comes as a step towards normalizing bilateral relations, which have seen a great deal of tension over the last 18 years. Claire O'Hagan reports.
The United States and Sudan, once close allies and friends. Then, in 1989, a military coup that carried Omar al-Bashir's Islamic regime to power brought the friendship to an end. In 1993, the US put Sudan on its list of states that sponsor terrorism, a protest against Osama bin Laden's residency in the country. Relations plummeted further in 1996 when the US shut its embassy in Khartoum and 1 year later imposed sweeping economic sanctions on the country. Washington upped the ante, launching Tomahawk cruise missiles on the Al-Shifa drug factory, claiming it produced chemical weapons for Al-Qaeda. But beyond the fires of Al-Shifa, Sudan started to cooperate with the US counterterrorism program. Officials hoped, in exchange for information, the US would end sanctions. In 2001, the US sponsored peace talks between Khartoum and a southern Sudanese rebel movement in an effort to end the 21-year civil war in the south. Hopes of ending the sanctions reached an all-time high in 2005, when Khartoum obeyed US wishes by signing the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. But just as peace began flourishing in the south, war came to the west, and the US rushed to point the finger at Khartoum. Sudanese hopes of improving relations were dashed once again.
The evidence leads us to the conclusion, the United States to the conclusion, that genocide has occurred and may still be occurring in Darfur. We believe the evidence corroborates the specific intent of the perpetrators to destroy a group in whole or in part, the words of the convention. This intent may be inferred from their deliberate conduct. We believe other elements of the convention have been met as well.
Yet this strange carrot-and-stick pattern of US-Sudan relations has continued. In the midst of what the US insisted was genocide, the CIA flew Salah Abdullah Ghosh, Sudan's top intelligence officer, on a private jet to Washington. Though Ghosh was implicated in the Darfur conflict, he had information Washington wanted. The US notched up domestic pressure and pushed international resolutions against Sudan over Darfur. Not only did sanctions remain, the superpower imposed yet more, punishing 30 major companies and individuals it deemed responsible for the war. On the surface, sanctions and harsh political statements have deepened the gap between Washington and Khartoum. But behind the scenes, there is another story of US interests and strategies in Sudan.
Well, joining me to discuss the Sudan-US relations from Washington, D.C., Janet McElligott, a former White House official who lived and worked in Sudan for many years. From Belgrade, Abdul Wahab Al-Afandi, senior lecturer in politics at the University of Westminster and specializing in African and Asian politics. And in Doha, Salah Khojali, a Sudanese political analyst. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Al-Afandi, if I could start off with you first, sir. Can this meeting achieve much, if anything?
Well, I think to start with some corrections to your report. This is not the first high-level meeting. Last year, the first Vice President Salva Kiir has visited Washington and has been received at the highest level. There have been contacts, and this has been one of the problems that there are two sides to the two allies in the government in Khartoum. The SPLA, who has very close and good working relationship with the United States, and the so-called Inqadh group led by al-Bashir, who don't seem to have that. And as you mentioned in the report, within the security services of that Inqadh regime, there are some people who have good relationship with the United States, and this has actually started in 2000. I don't think this visit is going to lead to a breakthrough at the moment, given the situation, because unless the Darfur issue is resolved, It is not possible at the moment for the United States government to enter into cordial relationships with the current government in Khartoum, because it will face intolerable pressure from the Congress and other groups.
Salah Khujali in Doha, do you agree that this meeting can achieve very little, if anything? And do you feel that Sudan is fundamentally misunderstood by the US?
Yes. I am very sure that Sudan was misunderstood by USA. And I can prove this very easily, because most of the decision taken by Washington was built on exaggerated reports or incorrect reports. I believe that the misunderstanding of the Sudanese government was built on some human rights report, and the problem was not tackled from political point of view. Because when you build a relation with a country, you build it country to country, and you don't take a province or a part of the country, and you build your relation accordingly.
Janet McCalligot in Washington, D.C., it seems as if Darfur is the biggest hot potato between the two nations. Let's have a look at UN Resolution 1769, the deployment of peacekeepers in Darfur. That was welcomed by Sudan. Do you think it'll help soften the rhetoric from the US?
The United States has pushed for such a long time to have peacekeeping troops, but it seems like we in the US have neglected one thing. Until there is peace in Sudan, until there is peace in Darfur, why are you sending in peacekeepers when there is no peace to keep? I hope I'm wrong in thinking that these peacekeeping troops will become live ammunition target. If they're not allowed to defend themselves and the people they're with, this could prove to be a terrible mistake that the United States has pushed for this in these US-Sudan relations. But Darfur is the main issue in the US-Sudan relations now, and that started right at the signing of the Naivasha agreements, when it looked like everything was going to be fantastic between the US and Sudan for the first time in over a decade.
Well, Andrew Natsios, the US Special Envoy to Sudan, said recently, I quote, "The only way the crisis in Darfur is going to be resolved is through a political settlement." Ma'am, are you encouraged by comments like this?
Mr. Natsios may not really understand what's going on in Darfur, unfortunately, because we went from having two rebel groups, the SLA, the Sudanese Liberation Army, and the JEM, the Justice and Equality Movement, and a proxy force called the Janjaweed, and the Sudanese government forces, and that has splintered now into almost 19 or 20 groups. It almost changes daily, because these rebel commanders have been paid to attend peace agreements, and there are now 20 different peace plans on the table, and things are a complete and total mess. We're sending, I fear, peacekeepers into a very volatile and dangerous situation. And the Sudanese government had asked for this not to happen because they didn't want to come like Lebanon, where Lebanon was basically invaded and UN people were treated as open targets most recently. And I think everyone knows that this could either turn the tide in a positive direction or a very negative one. And only time will tell. This high-level delegation right now to the United States is a step forward. And I'm hoping that this is a constructive step forward, and that finally the US is willing to engage on a political level that it needs to solve the Darfur crisis, instead of using the stick and carrot approach without having a carrot. This may be the first carrot the Sudanese government has seen.
Abdul Wahab Al-Afandi, Sudan recently expelled a Canadian diplomat for interfering in its affairs. How will that affect its relationship with Western nations as a whole?
Well, I think it will depend in the end on the circumstances of expelling that particular diplomat. But the issue has been, I think, in what Salah said, that the United States has been treating Sudan unfairly, is in some sense correct. But on the other side, the government thinks that it is the United States which can solve the Darfur problem or not. And it's in its view, the improving the relationship with the United States is key to resolving its internal problems. I think that should be the other way around, that the government of Sudan and the people of Sudan are the only people who can solve the Darfur problem. International intervention can help. The expelling of the diplomat had, unfortunately, confirms a pattern where some people, especially the security forces, they think that any movement, for example, if somebody talks to rebel groups or visits rebel areas, he would be interfering in international affairs and he should be punished. That would have been viable if there was no other ways of talking to these rebels. But as things stand, for example, Canada can invite these rebels to Ottawa and speak to them. So it is sometimes pointless and just exacerbate things more than they need to be. But I think the bottom line is that the Sudanese should try to resolve their problems and then go together to have relations. For example, if the SPLA wing of the government and the Inqaz wing of the government have managed to reach agreement, then the United States would be more likely to be favorable to the alliance there is. But at the moment,
but the big difference there was the SPLM had a political agenda and Darfur does not. This has only been about economic development, and so much of the problem that we face right now in Darfur as an international community is that it's international money that's coming in. And France, for example, is hosting one of these rebels as if he's the vice president of the country. The EU is paying rebel commanders $3,900 a month to come to different peace accords and peace talks. And what that's done is it's made everybody want to have their own faction and their own breakaway from the two main groups. And that's why we have such a mess today. Yes. Only with international intervention and the United States having finally a constructive role in solving Darfur. The Sudanese government can't solve this on their own because they didn't create it on their own.
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We'll talk more about this complex US-Sudanese relationship, but that's when we come back. Do stay with us.